All right, you can open up your Bibles to Judges 17. Judges 17. There were 12 judges in the book of Judges over that 450-year period. And the last judge, the 12th one, was Samson. And his life ends there in Judges 16. So we're actually through talking about all the judges. And what God does in Judges 17 through 21, I call it Israel's wickedness. He's basically showing you in these 5 chapters, Judges 17 through 21, what Israel was doing, their wickedness, how it manifested itself. So these are things that happened in that period, that 450-year period, and probably more toward the end, because as they went through that cycle, things just got worse and worse. We talked about the cycle where they would serve other gods, and then God would punish them by sending a nation against them, and then that nation would oppress them, take over, and then they would cry out to God, and God would deliver them, and they would basically give God lip service during the time of the judge as he's alive, and then once that judge dies, then they would go back to serving other gods, and they just go through that whole cycle. They never really did turn to God. They only turned to God for help to get out of the oppressor. And they didn't really serve God when the judge came around. They just gave him lip service. So the judges period is defined, you see here in Judges 17 and verse 6. Judges 17 verse 6. And then the last verse in the book of Judges, Judges 21 verse 25. They both say the same thing, that everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's the theme of how they lived. And so, of course, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. So because the flesh is wicked and they're not seeking God, then when they do what was right in their own eyes, all they do is the wickedness. And so we're going to see that in these chapters. I wanted to go in detail over this because it really, the writer of Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. And we can see these things repeat in our modern day as well. In Judges 17 and really 18 as well, you've got this religion that is created, and you can think of the Catholic religion, and you can see that here in Judges 17. So you notice, if you look at the language carefully, you can tell that see, man wants to do his wickedness, wants to do the evil, and he'll sort of justify his wicked deeds by doing things that appear to be good in the flesh, which is what's called religion. And so that's what you see in Judges 17, is the setting up of a religion. Now, God set up the Jewish religion. And He said that there would be 7 feasts per year. He said for them to obey the 10 Commandments. He set out of the 12 tribes, He set the tribe of Levi to be the priest or the mediator between God and the other tribes. There were certain rituals they had to do, daily sacrifices, a morning sacrifice, evening sacrifice, the prayers, and just they'd go through this religious life that God had set up for them. And what we'll see here is because in Judges, everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes, they're just going to make up the things. Because the thing about God's religion is that He made it in such a way to convict you of your sin. Galatians 3:24 says, the law was our schoolmaster to bring us unto Christ, that we might be justified by faith. And so when God set up the Mosaic law, some of these laws may seem arbitrary, seem crazy, but really what God was doing is He was setting up a law that would show Israel their sin. They'd be confronted with their sin, and so then they would need to trust in God to save them. But man, when he is wicked and deceitful above all things, what man will do then is create his own religion and so then he thinks, okay, well then I'm okay with God because I'm doing these things. Well, why don't you follow God's religion? Well, if I follow God's religion, then I'm convicted of my sin, because that's why God set up the rules the way he did. And I don't want to be convicted of my sin, so I'll set up my own religion. And so that's what we see here in Judges chapter 17 and verse 1. Judges 17 verse 1. There was a man of Mount Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said unto his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from thee, about which thou cursest, and spakest of also in mine ears, behold, the silver is with me, I took it. So the mother had 1,100 shekels of silver. It's probably a lot of money. And the Micah, the son, steals it from his own mother. And he is just so brazen about it. He just, a lot of times if you sin, the thing about sin is you should have a guilty conscience. You should feel bad about your sin. And that's the reason why God sets up these rules. Because if I know that I've sinned and I feel bad about it, then I try to do something to solve it, which of course would be trusting in God to save me, because I can't save myself. But you see here, he's not sorry for his sin. He doesn't have that guilty conscience. He just tells his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that you had, that were stolen from you, and you were cursing about it, about how it was taken away. I stole it from you. I took it. And so then his mother said, blessed be thou of the Lord, my son. Does that make any sense to you? You just told your mother that you stole her silver, a lot of silver, and she says, oh, blessed be thou of the Lord, my son. Then verse 3, when he had restored the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I had wholly dedicated the silver unto the Lord from my hand for my son, to make a graven image and a molten image. Now therefore I will restore it unto thee. So she says, well, it's okay that you stole it, because I was going to give it to you anyway, and I wanted to give it to you. It says, notice what she says there, Judges 17:3. She says, I dedicated the silver to the Lord. I dedicated the silver to the Lord. Why? To make a graven image and a molten image. To make graven and molten image. This tells you everyone is doing what is right in their own eyes. Because God gave commandments. He says, number 1, thou shalt have no other gods before me. Commandment number 2, thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. Number 3, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And in this one verse, the mother has broken all 3. She's going to have other gods before her, because she's making these graven images or molten images. Making the graven image breaks commandment number 2. And then she's taken the name of the Lord thy God in vain, because she says the money is for the Lord. I'm dedicating the money to the Lord, and I'm basically dedicating this graven image and the molten image to the Lord. And, you think about what she said and think about Catholicism. It's pretty much what they do. They have all these images that they make, but they say it's to the Lord. You say, oh, you're making a graven image. You having other gods before God. No, we're not. This is Mary, the mother of God, and we're not really worshiping her. She's just our mediator between us and Jesus, and she's our co-redemptrix and all that stuff, crazy stuff. They'll make the graven image in the name of the Lord. That's what she's doing here. And so then verse 4, the Micah restores the money unto his mother, and his mother took 200 shekels of silver and gave them to the founder, who made thereof a graven image and a molten image, and they were in the house of Micah. Okay, so now you've got Micah's house. He's got graven image and a molten image, but it's dedicated to the Lord. Notice verse 5. So what is the house of Micah? It says, the man Micah had a house of gods, and made an ephod and teraphim, and consecrated one of his sons, who became his priest. So Micah in verse 5 there, it's showing Micah makes his own religion. You remember what happened in the days of when Israel was in the wilderness, and you had the rebellion under Korah? I didn't look it up, but hopefully I can find it here. Number 16. Yeah, number 16, you've got Korah, and he is actually part of the Levite tribe, somehow related to the Levites there, but he's not the ones that God has said should be the leaders. It was Moses, and then Aaron would be the high priest, and Aaron's sons under him. And Korah, being a Levite, didn't like it, and so he says, well, we should be the leaders, not you. You know, it's like you're trying to get all the power and control. And Korah does this rebellion, and God says, well, you are not wholly consecrated toward me to be my priest. And so God says, I'll show you what I think of what you're doing. And basically when Korah and his gang offers incense unto the Lord, it's called strange fire because it's not fire from God's representatives. God had said Aaron would be the priest, then his sons, and Korah is a Levite, but he's not ordained to be one of these priests. And so God opens up the earth, and Korah and his people are swallowed whole down into the earth. They go down into hell. Israel sees that happen, and then the earth is closed upon them. People will say stuff like, well, if God's against me, let him strike me with lightning. So if God is real, let him kill me now. See him, and God never does that. And so then they say, well, see, there is no God because he didn't strike me with lightning. This right here is the best example of where God actually did something like that. The only one I know of where God opens up the earth and these people who claim to be priests are just swallowed down whole and they go down alive into the lake of fire, and then the earth closes up on them. That shows you the rebellion of Korah in number 16 shows you how serious God takes this. That God says, because if you're a priest, when God is holy, and so then only those who are consecrated for the Lord can offer sacrifices or be a priest, because you're dealing with a holy God, and it would mar his holiness to have sin in his presence. So God says, okay, of the tribes of Israel, the Levites are going to be the priests, and they couldn't just willy-nilly come in before the Lord. They had the Day of Atonement. Yom Kippur was a special day, only that one day out of the year. Good do they go to the Holy of Holies. Even if they went to the holy place for sacrifices, they would still have to wear the priestly garments. They would have to wash themselves. They had certain washings they had to do, certain sacrifices they had to do, certain ceremonies they had to go through, just so they would be physically in the flesh clean in the eyes of God, just so they could appear before God. And these are the people who God says are my people. When you got somebody else trying to do it like Korah, God opens up the earth, swallows them whole, they're down in the lake of fire. That's how serious this is. But yet here we are in Judges 17, and the man Micah builds a house of gods, made an ephod. The ephod is how the priest communicated with God, teraphim, and he consecrated one of his sons who became his priest. Micah is not a Levite. He has no ability, no right to do this. The people of Korah probably had a better right to be priests than Micah does. And it's not that he's offering fire to the Lord or incense to the Lord. He's got a house of gods. And he just makes up his own priestly line. So he makes up his own religion, his own priest. So he makes up his own priest, his own temple, his own gods. And the funny thing is, it's all, when you go back to verse 3, well, you know that apparently his mother is bought into this because he'd already made all this stuff. And she decided she would dedicate 1,100 shekels of silver to help him in his house of gods and his priest and religion. And she claims that she is dedicating the silver unto the Lord. So you would assume then that what Micah is doing with his own religion, his own priests, his own temple, his own gods, is all of this is in the name of the Lord. You can't get any worse than this. That's what, when the Antichrist comes in, he sets up there's an image of the beast that is set up in the temple. And when that happens, that is called the abomination of desolation. Setting up a false god, a false image in the house of God. I mean, God doesn't even want you to try to make an image of himself. He says, don't make any images of me. You don't have a physical description of God because he doesn't want you to make an image of him that looks like him. So you've got, God says, you can't even make an image of myself. You certainly can't make any graven images or have any other gods before me or do anything in my name, take my name of the Lord thy God in vain. Those three, they're the first three of the 10 Commandments. They're the biggest, most evil things you can do against God. And so when the Antichrist does that, he sets up a false god, an image in the temple. It is called the abomination of desolation because it's an abomination to the Lord that he does that. And it's called of desolation because it makes the house of God desolate. God isn't going to let you serve him and serve with this other image in there. So it makes the house desolate. It makes the house of the Lord desolate. So you know that when he makes a house of gods and an ephod of seraphim, consecrates one of his sons who became his priest, he's just making a false religion that God will not have any part of. And when you look at what it talks about there, what he did, you can see that that's exactly what the Catholics do. So what do you think God has when it comes to the Catholics? He doesn't have any part in that. He's not in the presence of the Catholics there. Because they're just doing the greatest evil they can against God. And so then verse 6 reminds you, in those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. And because they're so far removed from God, God just, he doesn't do like he did in the days of Korah. He, lets it happen. You go down to verse 10. Here's a guy who comes. Now, he finds in verse 7, there's a Levite who comes down. And he thinks, oh, well now, I've got my own priest. I've consecrated my son as a priest. But I know that the Levites are really the priests. So here's a Levite that came in. So I think I'll make him a priest. So in verse 9, he finds out he's a Levite. And so then verse 10, Micah said unto him, dwell with me, and be unto me a father and a priest. And I will give thee 10 shekels of silver by the year, and a suit of apparel, and thy victuals. So the Levite went in. And the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man was unto him as one of his sons. And Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and was in the house of Micah. Then said Micah, now know I that the Lord will do me good, seeing I have a Levite to my priest. I mean, you're doing the most abominable, wicked things you can do with God. God says, I'm holy, you got to be holy. I've set aside the Levites, and I'm the one who consecrates them. They have to go through these cleansing ceremonies and do all these different things to be able to be in my presence, and then I will accept the sacrifice. But if they don't, I'm not going to accept it. And you can't have no other gods before me, no graven images. Don't take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. And Micah is breaking all of this. He's just making up his own rules. And so he says, well, it seems like it's not working out too good for me, so I'll get this Levite and I'll make him a priest. But you notice it says there that in verse 12, Micah consecrated the Levite. What authority does this Micah have to consecrate the Levite? And how is he holy before? How can Micah make a Levite holy before him, before God, if Micah has all these images and a house of gods, and he's breaking all the rules anyway? There's no way God is going to accept it, but yet he thinks that now I know that the Lord will do me good, seeing I have a Levite to my priest. And you notice the terminology too. In Judges 17:10, he says, dwell with me and be unto me a father and a priest. That right there is Catholic terminology. The Catholics call their priest father. Jesus said, call no man on the earth father, meaning, spiritually speaking, because there's only one Father, that is God. Like I said, the writer of Ecclesiastes says there's nothing new under the sun. So here we are in the book of Judges, and people may say, well, I don't really care about studying Judges. I mean, it's Old Testament, Israel's program. A lot of things have happened since then. Now we're in the dispensation of grace with Paul. So, why do we study this? Well, you study it because you can see that the Catholic system, the religion, isn't something that was just created out of thin air with Constantine 1700 years ago. This is something that has been around ever since Satan rivaled God. He has his own religion. He's making a mockery. Basically what Satan is doing is he's working through Micah to make a mockery of the system or the religion that God set up for the nation of Israel. It's like you get somebody that's a Levite. Well, God said you had to have a Levite as a priest. Well, I'm going to make mine a Levite. And I'm going to call this, that the Lord will do me good. And I'm going to call him a father and a priest, just like what the Catholics do. So you've got in Judges 17 this religion that is just a sheer mockery of what God set up. And so it's just the worst thing you can do. If God sets up something, you set up something that's like it, but you create your own rules and your own system, and then you think the Lord's going to bless that? I mean, that's crazy. Like when I was living in Southern California, you had Disneyland there. That was a big amusement park, big attraction. Well, then Knott's Berry Farm was built, different company, and they have their amusement park there too. You think Disneyland is happy about Knott's Berry Farm being there? You think Disneyland is going to bless the owners of Knott's Berry Farm? Of course not. They're a rival company. You think Coca-Cola likes it when Pepsi starts gaining market share? No, they're working for themselves. The Lord sets up a religion for Israel to show them their sin so that they'll trust in God to save them. And because God is holy, everything had to be specific. When God gave the instructions to Moses, not only did he give them specific laws and commandments, but when he gave him the rules about making the temple, he told him, you got to see to it that you make this temple according to the pattern that I have laid out for you. And in fact, over there in Exodus 31, he says, I'm going to give this man Bezalel, I'm going to fill him with my spirit, so that when he oversees the making of this temple, this tabernacle, that he does it exactly right. You got, chapters and chapters of instructions on exactly how you're to build that tabernacle. And even if you try your best to do it exactly according to the instructions, you're not going to be perfect. You're going to make a mistake here or there. But God had to make sure you make that tabernacle exactly according to the commandments that I give you. No variations whatsoever. And so I will fill you with my spirit to make sure that that tabernacle is built just perfectly, exactly like I said. The tabernacle had to be holy. It had to be built perfectly according to those instructions. And yet here's Micah. He just builds his own temple. I'm sure he didn't go by those instructions. He just did whatever he wanted to do. He builds graven images. He's worshiping other gods. He consecrates his own sons as a priest. When he sees that doesn't go well, he decides to consecrate a Levite as a priest. And now he thinks the Lord's going to do him good. It's ridiculous. But it shows you everyone did what was right in his own eye. They don't care squat about what God says. They don't care anything about what God says. They're only doing what they want to do. But then they'll say it's in God's name because then it eases a guilty conscience and they think they'll be okay. So it continues here in Judges chapter 18, verse 1. Again, the reminder, in those days there was no king in Israel, and in those days the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in, for unto that day all their inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribes of Israel. You can reference back there in Judges chapter 1, there was problems. And the reason, and if you go back to Judges 1, many of the tribes, they didn't get all of the land that God had for them. And it's because of their unbelief. When they start serving other gods, serving Baal and Ashtaroth, then they're not going to get the land. They're not going to be able to utterly destroy the Canaanites that are there. It tells you in Judges chapter 1, verse 27, that Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shean and her towns, nor Tanish and her towns, nor the inhabitants of Dor and her towns. And it goes on. Verse 29, neither did Ephraim drive out the Canaanites. Verse 30, neither did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron. Verse 31, neither did Asher drive out the inhabitants of Asho. But verse 32, the Asherites dwelt among the Canaanites. Verse 33, neither did Naphtali drive out the inhabitants of Beth Shemesh. And then Judges 1, verse 34 says, Judges 1:34, and the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountain, for they would not suffer them to come down to the valley. Israel was supposed to go into the land and utterly destroy and take over, fully possess the land of Canaan. But due to their unbelief, they never did. And so you see in Judges 1, it tells you about all these tribes. They never did get the land that they should have because of their unbelief. So here in Judges 18, Danites, that's what we just read in Judges 1 verse 34, they didn't get all, the tribe of Dan didn't get all their land. So now we're in Judges 18 and verse 1, and they said, well, we didn't get all of our inheritance. So then what they do is they go and they find, verse 3, they were by the house of Micah, it says, and they knew the voice of the young man, the Levite. So apparently this Levite was in the area of Dan before, when he sojourned over to where Micah is, and so they knew him. And so then he explains in verse 4, Judges 18 verse 4, this priest of Micah said unto them, thus and thus dealeth Micah with me, and hath hired me, and I am his priest. So, so they find out, oh, okay, well, he's a priest now. So then verse 5, they said unto him, ask counsel, we pray thee of God, that we may know whether our way which we go shall be prosperous. What? Don't you know that God set up the Levites as the tribe to be the priest? That you can't have, you see the house of Micah and you see all this house of gods and these graven images? And you think that, oh, okay, well, it's a priest. Oh, will you pray to God for me and see if my journey is going to be prosperous? Well, this priest isn't with God because he's not according to the system. He's not in the temple that God set up. He's in a false temple with false gods, with false images. But because man does what is right in his eyes, all he's doing is trying to give lip service to God through a religion and thinking if he gives lip service to God, then God's going to bless him. So he figures, oh, well, the Danites say, well, we want to get the territory. We haven't been able to get it. So, oh, you're a priest? Well, why don't you pray to God and maybe he'll bless us? So then verse 6, the priest said unto them, go in peace. Before the Lord is your way wherein ye go. That's another thing that you'll see the Catholics say, go in peace. Whenever God, you've seen in the book of Judges, you've seen that the Israel is serving other gods. If you read through your Old Testament, you'll see that whenever God speaks to Israel due to their unbelief, it's usually bad stuff. It's, I'm going to take you out of the land. I'm going to bring your enemies against you. You read Leviticus, you'll see the 5 cycles of chastisement. Leviticus 26, we went over that for a few weeks. And God just brings punishment after punishment after punishment. Throughout all these prophets, he brings warning after warning after warning. Thus saith the Lord, turn back to me, and I will heal you. You don't see God saying, hey, you built your own house of gods and these graven images. You consecrate your own priest, dedicate to me. I think that's great. You don't see God doing that. Because he's got holy, perfect standards, and when they fall short, he warns them. So if you've got a house of gods and you've got a priest consecrated by Micah who is breaking all the commandments here, that the Lord did not speak to this priest through to the Danites, go in peace, but yet What do the Catholics do? You don't see the Catholic, you go to a priest with the Catholics, they don't tell you, oh, well, you need to recognize your sin and trust in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as atonement for your sin. And then you'll have eternal life. Otherwise, you're going into hell. They do this stuff. You know, I'm your father, I'm your priest. Go in peace. The Lord will prosper you wherever you go. It's always these good feeling, positive things. Because if you tell me how bad I am and wicked I am, well, I don't want to hear that. I mean, that's why Micah built this house of gods and the images in the first place. And said it's dedicated to the Lord. Because if you make your own house of gods and you make your own gods and you make your own priests, then you can make your own rules. And then you don't have to follow what God says. So then if you want to be prosperous, well, you say, okay, yeah, God says you'll be prosperous. They just make this stuff up, but that's exactly what the Catholics do. Go in peace. You know. Okay, so now what happens is, you know, it gets better now. The Danites say, hey, he's got a good thing set up. I think we should have this set up for ourselves. So verse 17, Judges 18, verse 17, it says the 5 men, these are the 5, there was an army of 600 men with the Danites, but then they had 5 men sort of as the spies or the lookout, the head guys there. It says in verse 17, Judges 18, 17, and the 5 men that went to spy out the land went up and came in thither and took the graven image and the ephod and the teraphim and the molten image. And the priest stood in the entering of the gate with the 600 men that were appointed with weapons of war. And these went into Micah's house and fetched the carved image, the ephod, the teraphim, and the molten image. Then said the priest unto them, what do ye? In other words, what are you doing? You're stealing my religion. What's going on here? I'm getting paid by Micah to be a priest here, and you're taking all this stuff with you. I don't like that. I'm out of a job. You do that. Verse 19, they said unto him, hold thy peace, lay thine hand upon thy mouth, and go with us, and be to us a father and a priest. Oh, there you go again. 17:10, a father and a priest. Now Judges 18:9, be a father and a priest. Wait a minute, I gave you the wrong verse, didn't I? 18:19. Yeah. Okay. So Judges 17:10, Micah says he's going to be a father and a priest to me. And now Judges 18:19, he says, oh, well, don't say anything, hold your peace. Don't blab about us stealing Micah's religion, and we'll take you with us, and you can be a father and a priest to us. And it says, is it better for thee to be a priest unto the house of one man, or that thou be a priest unto a tribe and a family in Israel? So then the guys think, oh, well, yeah, you got a point there. Now I'm moving up. I thought I was going to be out of a job and you're stealing my religion, but now I'm getting a promotion. I'm going from a one-man operation to now I'm going to be a priest of the whole tribe. So verse 20, the priest's heart was glad. He took the ephod and the teraphim and the graven image and went in the midst of the people. So they turned and departed and put the little ones in the cattle and the carriage before them. So I wrote on your outline that the Danites, what they do is the Danites steal Micah's religion. I mean, isn't this crazy? It's a false religion. It's not really serving God. It's breaking all these commandments. I mean, why would you want to steal something like that? You know, couldn't you make up your own religion? You just got to copy the other one, you know. Verse 24, he said, Micah's upset about it. Micah says to them, verse 24, ye have taken away my gods which I made. Isn't that funny? The gods which I made. Well, if you made them, then how are they your gods? A god is somebody over you. You know, I did not make God. God made me. If I made God, then I am God. He's not God. I am God. So he says, ye have taken away my gods which I made. So they're not really gods. And if they're really gods, how could you do that? How could you steal them? I mean, when the Philistines took the Ark of the Covenant and they brought it into the house of their God, the Lord, through the Ark of the Covenant, had the Dagon was the name of the Philistine god, had him fall down, lost his arms, lost his legs. They had to prop him back up. There's power behind the true God, the God of Israel, but these false gods, there's no power. You try to steal say, somebody's kid. Well, the kid might put up a big fuss, or the parents try to get him back, or do something to, try to shoot you or do something because you're harming my kid. But these gods are inanimate objects. They're not real. There's no power. So you can just go in and steal them, and there's nothing you can do about it. So ye have taken away my gods which I made, and the priest, and ye are gone away. And what have I more? And what is this that ye say unto me, what aileth thee? What do you mean, why are you upset? You stole my religion. I built this religion. My mom paid 200 shekels of silver to build this graven image. Verse 25, the children of Dan said unto him, let not thy voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows run upon thee, and thou lose thy life with the lives of thy household. So the Danites threatened him. So apparently, where is the power of the gods that Micah made to save Micah? When you got men of the children of Dan who can threaten him, and he just goes back, and now he's lost his religion. Poor Micah. They stole his religion. And then verse 27, they took the things which Micah had made, and the priest which he had, and came unto Laish, unto a people that were at quiet and secure, and they smote them with the edge of the sword, and burnt the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Zidon, and they had no business with any man, and it was in the valley that lieth by Beth Rehob, and they built a city, and dwelt therein, and they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan their father, who was born unto Israel, howbeit the name of the city was Laish at the first. And the children of Israel set up the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan, until the day of the captivity of the land. And they set them up Micah's graven image, which he made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. So you've got the true house of God being in Shiloh, but now you've got this house of abominations, the house of gods, being in Dan. And you notice here in 18:27 through 31, Dan takes their own land. So back in Judges chapter 1, we saw all these tribes, because of their unbelief, their apostasy, serving other gods, God would not give them the full land that they should have had. And so basically they said, well, we'll just create our own religion. Oh, yeah, this religion by this house of Micah, that looks good. So I'll take his graven images. I'll take his ephod. I'll take his teraphim. I'll take his priest. And I'll kill Micah if he tries to stop me. And so then I'll take all that. And here are these people over here on the side here. And they're quiet. They don't really have... they probably don't have guns and things to defend themselves. So we'll go in there. It's probably a gun-free zone. So they would say, we'll go in there and we'll just take over and we'll take our land. So we didn't get the land that God promised us because of what you said, unbelief. No big deal. We'll get our own land. And that's what Satan does. Like Satan, he says, he's probably Satan was the cherub that covered God's throne. And, cherubs had light as their clothing. And he loses his clothing of light because of his rebellion against God. Well, Ezekiel 28 says he clothes himself with rubies and all these different gems and things. He creates his own clothing of light to have a reflection of that. That's what man does when he rebels against God. God has promises for him if he will trust in God. And man says, well, I don't need God. I can do that myself. So God said to the Danites, you can have this land. And now they say, well, no, we don't want to do that. We're just going to create our own religion. We're going to steal it from Micah. We're going to have our own religion. We're not going to serve the house of God was in Shiloh, where God was meeting with Israel. We're not going to go there. We're just going to go to our own. We've got our own tribe here, our own house, our false gods here. And we just took over these quiet, peaceful people, and we stole their land from them. So we stole the religion, and we stole the land, and so we're good the way it is. And it says there in verse 30 that they were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. So you're going all the way to the 70-year Babylonian captivity that they are, or for them, for Dan, it'd be in the northern, so it'd be the Assyrian, 70-year Assyrian captivity, which is a little sooner. But still, you're talking about several hundred years where they do not go to the house of God. Instead, they're going to these, or worshiping these false gods. When the kingdom is divided after Solomon's son Rehoboam, in the days of Rehoboam, the kingdom is divided. Jeroboam is the king of the north. Jeroboam has the 10 tribes, northern tribes of Israel. He is over them. And then the house of God is in Jerusalem in Judah by that time, which is the southern part. You got the tribes of Judah and Benjamin down there. And so you've got that divided kingdom. The northern tribe of Israel's and the southern tribes of Judah, where Jerusalem is, where God would dwell. Every single king in Israel, the northern tribes, is evil. Why? Because they served other gods. Why did they serve other gods? Because they had their own religion set up. Jeroboam says, well, if God's house is in Jerusalem, and that's in the southern part, that's a different nation, and we're up here in the north with Israel, and the law requires them to go down to the temple in Jerusalem to appear before the Lord 3 times a year at 3 of the feasts. If they do that, I'm going to lose all my people. Because, if I've got to say, here I am in Alabama, if I had to travel to California 3 times a year to do whatever, I mean, that's expensive. It's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of time for me to travel all that way. So why don't I just move to California and then I don't have to do all that traveling? So Jeroboam says, I'm going to lose all my people. They got to go to Jerusalem 3 times a year. That takes time. That takes money. They'll just move down there. So I know what I'll do. I'll set up gods in, he sets up a golden calf in the northern part of there and in the southern part. The 2 places where he sets them up. In fact, here, I'll give you the verses. I'm telling you all this stuff, but let me give you the verse where it shows where he does this, because this is important. So Jeroboam, the kingdom is divided. Jeroboam is that first king up there in Israel, the 10 northern tribes. And in 1 Kings chapter 12, 1 Kings chapter 12, that's, I just told you about what Jeroboam said. He says in verse 26, 1 Kings 12:26, Jeroboam said in his heart, now shall the kingdom return to the house of David, if this people go up to do sacrifice in the house of the Lord at Jerusalem. Then I'm going to lose the kingdom. So verse 28, whereupon the king took counsel, made 2 calves of gold, and said unto them, it is too much for you to go up to Jerusalem. Behold thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And verse 29 now, he set the one in Bethel, and the other put he in Dan. And this thing became a sin, for the people went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. So when the kingdom is divided, the worship center, now later on it becomes Samaria under Ahab, but initially the worship center in Israel is set up in Dan. But you can see it's a false religion because they've set up these golden calves. Why do you think he set it up in Dan? And you notice it says he set one in Bethel and one in Dan. But then verse 30 says they went to worship before the one, even unto Dan. It seems like, at least from that they didn't really go up to the one in Bethel so much. Although, I mean, he did. Verse 32, Jeroboam places priest in Bethel. But it's just interesting that it mentions them going to Dan. Why? Well, because Dan is where the idolatry was set up in the book of Judges. And if they have the house of Micah and their own priest and their own ephod and their own gods and the teraphim and all this stuff, they have all this set up in Dan way back here in Judges. And it said in Judges 18 verse 30 that they continued there until the captivity of the land. Then, in other words, Dan is the center. You might as well say Dan is the center now in Israel of apostasy or false religion or false gods. False gods. So that's why Jeroboam sets one in Dan and one in Bethel, because Dan is already basically the center of the rival system of Satan and this false religion there. Now look over in, hold your place in Judges. We won't come back to 1 Kings, but look over in Revelation chapter 7. Revelation chapter 7, in the very end here, halfway through the tribulation period, there are 144,000 believers in Israel who were sealed, 12,000 from each tribe. And Revelation chapter 7, verses 4 through 8. Revelation 7, verses 4 through 8. By the way, if anybody says to you, we are spiritual Israel today, the promises that God gave us, God gave Israel, they lose them because of they crucified Jesus, and so now we get those promises. Well, my question is, which tribe are you? If you're spiritual Israel, which tribe are you? Which of these 12 tribes are you? And how do you know what tribe you are? We can read over in Genesis. In fact, we'll get there after Revelation 7. We'll see that each tribe in Israel had specific, God has specific duties and things for each tribe. And it's under the blessing that Jacob gives in the end of the book of Genesis where we see these things. But anyway, notice here, Revelation 7, verse 4. I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. All the tribes. No tribe is left out, right? If it's all the tribes, no tribe is left out. Verse 5, of the tribe of Judah, 12,000, tribe of Reuben, 12,000, tribe of Gad, 12,000, tribe of Asher, 12,000, tribe of Naphtali, 12,000, tribe of Manasseh, 12,000, tribe of Simeon, 12,000, tribe of Levi, sealed 12,000, tribe of Issachar, 12,000, tribe of Zabulon, 12,000, tribe of Joseph, sealed 12,000, tribe of Benjamin, sealed 12,000. There's 12 names there, 12 tribes. Which tribe is missing? Dan is missing. Dan is no longer a tribe of Israel. You say, well, how did you get 12? If Dan is missing, you should only have 11. Well, the reason is because Joseph, as a believer, was given the double blessing. And Joseph had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Joseph is listed in verse 8, and Manasseh, which is Manasseh, is listed in verse 6. So you've got Dan is not listed here, and then is replaced by the double blessing of Joseph. So why do you think Dan isn't a tribe in Israel? I mean, because of what happens in Judges 18. I mean, this is a significant event. You think of the book of Judges, we're covering 450 years period of time. Judges 17 through 21 doesn't give you every single event. There's only a couple of events, 3 or 4 events here in those 5 chapters that are listed in Judges 17 through 21 to summarize the wickedness in Israel during that 450 years. And 2 chapters, 17 and 18, are devoted to the creation of a religion like the Catholicism, and Dan stealing that religion, and now Dan becoming the worship center in Israel for the false religion and the center of apostasy. And that is why I think that Dan is not a tribe of Israel anymore due to that. I mean, you notice in Judges 18, it says there in verse 30, it said in Judges 18:30, the children of Dan set up the graven image, and Jonathan the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. So you've got a false religion worship center in Dan from now until the Assyrian captivity. Then verse 31 says they set them up Micah's graven image which he made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. The house of God is in Shiloh until you get to the time when in the days of David, and then you finally get over to Jerusalem there as the house of God, but it was in Shiloh before. So they set up their own religion. They wouldn't go to the house of God all that time. And that's why Jeroboam sets up the false god in Dan, and the people went to Dan. So God basically says, you didn't show up to me, you created your own false religion, so guess what? You're not a tribe of Israel. Now they are, it doesn't mean that there aren't people saved in Dan. If you go to Genesis, I mentioned the blessing that Jacob gives to Israel, and we're not really there, but I'll just mention it here. In Genesis chapter 49, in Genesis 49, the 12 sons of Jacob are listed, and it tells you, if you read the whole chapter, you find out what each of them has their own duties, their own role that they will play in God's kingdom on earth. And Genesis 49 will go over that. But when it comes to Dan, it mentions in Genesis 49, verse 16 and 17, verses 16 through 18 really. So Genesis 49, verses 16 through 18 is the prophecy regarding Dan. And it says there, Genesis 49, verse 16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. They aren't a tribe of Israel. They lose that distinction due to their idolatry and their false religion. And you don't see them sealed in Revelation 7 like you do for the other tribes. But it says they will judge as one of the tribes. It says as if they are one of the tribes, but they're not. So in other words, the Danites are still going to be in the kingdom. But what are they? Verse 17, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, and adder in the path, that biteth the horse heel, so that his rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. You know what that sounds like? It sounds like Genesis 3:15, the curse given to Satan. He says, the seed of the woman, it shall bruise thy head, bruise Satan's head, but that Satan would bruise Jesus' heel. So Satan is that serpent in Genesis 3. He is the one that bites and bruises the heel of Jesus, and Jesus bruises his head. And here it mentions Dan is going to be a serpent by the way, an adder of the path that biteth the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. It sounds a lot like what Satan is doing in Genesis 3:15, trying to get against the seed of the woman. Dan is in line with that. What does that tell you then? What that tells you then is these false religions, the false gods, the graven images, and everything that Dan did. This right here is basically Satan's religion. It's Satan trying to counteract to get you away from believing God and His Word, following His Word, and instead follow His religion. And that's why this language that we've seen, what do we see here? They made graven and molten images. We see he made his own religion, his own priest, temple, and gods. He called his leader a father and a priest. The priest told the Danites, go in peace. These are all Catholic terminology that's used today. And all it is this an extension of what was done under Dan. There's nothing new under the sun. This is the Babylonian satanic religion that's going to show up under the Antichrist, that's today in mystery form in the Catholic Church, and that was done here in Dan. It's Satan's stronghold, basically, in the Promised Land to get a false religion and a false god and all these things in the name of the Lord. That's Satan's religion there. And so that's why that language in Genesis 49:17 is as it is. It's very comparable to Genesis 3:15. What the serpent is going to do, what Satan is going to do. He's going to do it through his religion, which is found in Dan. Satan has infiltrated Israel through the tribe of Dan, through that religion. And that's why you've got two of these 5 chapters here in Judges are on that subject. So a lot of important information there. Okay, now Judges 19. I do want to get through Judges today. We won't spend a whole lot of time on the last 3 chapters. But basically what happens in Judges 19 is first, before we read that, let's go over to Genesis 19. Genesis chapter 19. and remind you of the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now there, God had promised that Abraham, that if there were at least 10 righteous in Sodom and Gomorrah, he would not destroy that. So then God sends 2 angels to check it out and give him back a report of if there are 10 righteous. So the angels come to Lot. He knows they're angels. Lot then says, stay in my house. And Lot has a couple of daughters who have husbands. And so then at night there, the 2 angels are in Lot's house. And then in verse 4, Genesis 19 and verse 4, it says, but before they lay down, before the angels lay down to go to sleep for that night, before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. In other words, in Genesis 19, verses 4 through 5, Sodom given over to homosexuality. And in fact, another term for homosexuality is sodomy. And the word sodomy comes from Sodom. If the term homosexual is sodomy, and this is Sodom, it shows you how they're basically one and the same. You saw it as men, young and old, from every quarter, and they come and say, where are those 2 men? We want to know them. In other words, we want to have homosexual relations with them. And he says to them, Lot went out. He says, don't do this. Verse 8, he says, I have 2 daughters, which are virgins, which they're not really because they've got husbands. But he lies to them and says, why don't you just, he says there in verse 8, I have 2 daughters which are not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. Verse 9, they say, basically, we don't want to do that. We want to be with those 2 men. And so they try to force their way in. But since the men are angels, they are able to blind. In verse 11, they blind the men of the city, so it stops this from happening. But what it does is it tells those angels that there are not 10 righteous in the city. The whole city is given over to homosexuality. They're not righteous, and so the city is worthy of being destroyed. That's in a nutshell, that's what Sodom and Gomorrah is all about, Genesis 19. Okay, with that in mind, go to Judges 19. Same number. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not. Maybe it's not. And in Judges 19, there is in verse 1, it says, it came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel. Again, we're told that. No king in Israel, because that means everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And now we're going to get an example of that here. It says, there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim, who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. Okay, so he's got a concubine, which really shouldn't have one of those. And he's traveling, and it goes through a whole story here, which we won't go through. But basically, he's going to stay a night, and then the next morning get up and travel to another city. And first off, no one really invites him in except this old man. So this old man invites the man and his concubine to stay with him that night, and then they can move on, journey the next day. So verse 16 mentions the old man. He offers them food, offers them a place to stay. And so then verse 22. So you've got the man and his concubine in the house of the old man, and they're just going to stay the night and then move on. They don't have a Motel 6 or Holiday Inn or anything like that. So they got to stay, and they're fellow Israelites, so you would expect a Jew to help out a fellow Jew. So then, in verse 22 now, Judges 19:22, now as they were making their hearts merry, behold, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, Belial is another word for the devil, or Baal, so these aren't good guys, beset the house round about, and beat at the door, and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. That's very similar to what we read, what happened in Sodom. And you notice, the man has a concubine. I would assume if he's got a concubine, it's probably a young, attractive woman. So, if men are doing according to, as Romans 1 calls it, the natural use of the woman, you would think they would say, wow, that was a good-looking woman in there. And they would go after that. They're not concerned about the attractive concubine. They don't care about that because they're wholly given over to their reprobate mind, and so they want to have sex with the man. So, again, now the whole city isn't given over to it like you had with Sodom, but it's certain men. Certain men given over to the homosexuality. Certain men of Belial, it says there. So it's not the whole city. Probably an attractive woman. We don't want her. We want the man. Because they're further down in their sexual perversion. So the man, verse 23, he does just like Lot says, don't do this wicked thing. And then verse 24, he says, behold, here is my daughter, a maiden, and his concubine. Them I will bring out now, and humble ye them, and do with them what seemeth good unto you. But unto this man do not so vile a thing. So he offers these homosexual men 2 women, just like Lot offered. Lot had 2 daughters. This man offers his daughter, and then also the concubine. So he offers them 2 women. Verse 25, the men would not hearken to him. So the man took his concubine and brought her forth unto them. Basically, they wouldn't listen. So he tries to keep them from these certain men of Belial from killing them. So then he just throws his concubine out the door. And it says, brought her forth unto them, and they knew her, and abused her all the night until the morning. And when the day began to spring, they let her go. So they actually aren't quite as wicked as the men in Sodom, but pretty bad, you know, what they're doing here. They rape the woman all night long. And then finally, I guess they get tired of her, and so then they let her go. Verse 26, then came the woman in the dawning of the day, and fell down at the door of the man's house, where her Lord was, till it was light. And her Lord rose up in the morning, and opened the doors of the house, and went out to go his way. And behold, the woman, his concubine, was fallen down at the door of the house, and her hands were upon the threshold. And he said unto her, up, and let us be going. But none answered. So basically what happened was, they raped this woman all night. And then, you notice in verse 27 that the man who brought the concubine with him really has no concern whatsoever for her well-being. He basically, to save his own life, just threw her out the door. And you got to assume if he at least cared about her somewhat, that he wouldn't have slept at all at night. He'd have been thinking, what are they doing out there? I know there's men out there. I hear stuff going on. This isn't good. If you knew, if somebody that I didn't even know, if I knew something was happening, let's say something outside the, say it's like the riots that happened in Rodney King's day, the riots were happening, and I can't stop it. I'm one man and they got a whole mob and they're doing all this stuff. But they're doing it right outside of my door, these riots. I'm probably not going to sleep that night because I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking, what are they doing out there? Are they going to come in here? Are they going to come against me? You got all these things. You know that these evil crimes are going on right outside your door, and you can't do anything about it. And it's nighttime, so it's, I wouldn't sleep any. I know when the hurricane came, Lana didn't get any sleep. She's worried about the wind and the rain and all this stuff coming, and because you hear it going against your house, and nothing you can do about it. But yet this man, it says, her Lord rose up in the morning. It sounds like he got a good night's sleep. He wasn't worried at all about it. And then what probably happened was, after they raped her all night, she was still alive. And of course, what she was trying to do is try to get to the door and get inside. But the man is asleep inside, not concerned at all whatsoever about her well-being, and he's just asleep in there. And so, if her hand is on the threshold of the door, I'm sure she knocked or yelled or did something. He wasn't concerned. He was sound asleep, like nothing was going on, like everything was great. He didn't have any concern with her whatsoever. And so then what ended up happening was she died out there after being abused all night, and no one would come to the door to take her up. And then when the man gets ready, you notice what he says. I mean, if you saw, you can imagine how she was abused and now she's dead. You know she doesn't look good in the morning light. You don't see him saying, "Oh man, what happened to you? Oh, come in and let me clean up your wounds or get some food or something." He says, verse 28, "Up and let us be going." And then when she didn't answer, then it says the man took her up upon an ass, and the man rose up and gat him unto his place. And when he was come into his house, he took a knife and laid hold on his concubine and divided her together with her bones into 12 pieces and sent her into all the coast of Israel. So basically he says, well, can't use her now, so I'll just show you what evil happened here tonight. And he cuts her in 12 pieces and sends it out to each tribe of Israel to show what happened that night. And so it was a very bad thing. But you can see all the way around, if you read the whole chapter, which we didn't have time to do, if you read the whole chapter 19, you can see the great evil here, the wickedness. There is no remorse over sin. There is no guilty conscience. There's no trying to cover it up. It's just, we want to sleep with that man. Oh, instead you throw the concubine out. Okay, we'll just rape and abuse her all night. And then the men inside are just sound asleep, not even caring about what's going on outside. The woman's trying to get inside, a hand on the threshold, trying to get inside. They don't even come to the door after it's all over. You'd think at least, I would think if you couldn't do anything, you'd hear all the noise out there. And then once the noise quieted down and you hear the concubine yelling, the first thing you'd do is you'd open the door and try to bring her in and do something. Nope. They don't have any concern. They're sound asleep in the bed. And then when they finally come out, they look down. Okay, let's go. Well, you can see what bad condition she's in. You're not going to do anything about it. Come on, let's go. Oh, you can't go? Okay, well then I'll take her and I'll cut her into 12 pieces and I'll send her out to the tribes of Israel. I mean, you just read this story and it just shows you, just like it says, like I mentioned, Israel's wickedness. And what you see is, when Adam ate of the tree, he ate of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And we can't do the good, because in your flesh dwells no good thing. All you can do is the evil. But you can try to appear like you're doing the good. And so in chapters 17 and 18, what we saw in Judges 17 and 18 is the appearance of good with this religion, which we see that obviously it's not right. We went over the details of that. And then in chapters 19, really chapter 19 and through 21, you see human evil. No remorse, no sorry for their sins, no conscience. It's just, Judges 19 is very close to what happened in Sodom. And in Sodom, God says, they're pure evil, there aren't 10 righteous, I am destroying the whole city with a fire. Look in Isaiah chapter 1. Look in Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah chapter 1. Isaiah chapter 1 verses 9 and 10. Isaiah 1 verses 9 and 10. Isaiah 1 verse 9. Except the Lord of hosts had left unto us a very small remnant, we should have been as Sodom, and we should have been like unto Gomorrah. This is the prophecy of the Lord given to Isaiah about Israel. He says, you are just like Sodom, and you are just like Gomorrah. The only difference is I didn't destroy you. I left a remnant. And then verse 10, he says, verse 10, hear the word of the Lord, ye rulers of Sodom. Give ear unto the law of our God, ye people of Gomorrah. Well, you know Sodom and Gomorrah was destroyed in Genesis 19. What he's doing there is he's saying to Israel, you are just like Sodom and Gomorrah. And in fact, spiritually speaking, that's what you are. So I am going to call you Sodom and Gomorrah in verse 10. When he says, you rulers of Sodom, you people of Gomorrah, that's referring to the nation of Israel. So Israel equals, by this point, Sodom and Gomorrah. But the difference is God made a covenant with them. He wouldn't destroy them, so he left a remnant, and they're still alive to this day. But when you read Genesis 19, and then you read Judges 19, you can understand why God says this. Because what happens in Judges 19 is eerily similar to what happened in Sodom and Gomorrah. That shows you how bad Israel has gotten. And they think they're okay because they've got their appearance of good with their false religion in chapter 17 and 18. And what do you see today? The Catholic Church has these same things. Father and a priest go in peace. They got their own temples. They've got their own molten images and graven images. And you have all these Catholic priests that have been charged with homosexual things with the altar boys and all this gross sexual perversions that have taken place in there because the appearance of the good is a cover for the human evil. And that's exactly what was happening in Judges. Gross homosexuality and sexual perversions going on. And it's okay because God is on our side because we've been blessed by the priest over there in Micah's house who's now in Dan's house because the Danites stole the religion and the priest. I mean, it's just utter folly. And they think the Lord is with them and blessing them. It's crazy. But yet that's exactly what people think today in the United States with their Catholic Church. They think if I go to Mass and I go to the priest and say my Hail Marys that I'm okay with God, even though I'm doing all this gross perversions in the background and I'm not really recognizing my sin and looking to God for the answer. I'm just going in to try to get appeasement from this man who calls himself a priest so that I can just have the form of godliness, the appearance of good, and then I'll just go back out and do all this perverted stuff again. There's no difference between Judges 17 through 21 and what's happening today. It's nothing new under the sun. So now we're in Judges 20 and 21. Let's cover those before we close. And you can see here again, now you've got in chapter 20 verse 1, because of what happened here, it says, then all the children of Israel went out, and the congregation were gathered together as one man, from Dan even to Beersheba, with the land of Gilead unto the Lord in Mizpah. What had happened was they're making a reaction to this this gross thing that happened in Judges 19, and it happened in Benjamin. So they say, we're going to come against them. What do you have today? You have that too. You have, the Catholic priest and what happened with them, with the perversions with the altar boys and all this stuff. And so then they come out and they say, we got to get justice. You look at the Me Too movement. Oh, we care about these women and how they're abused in Hollywood, and you get all these social justice causes. The evil still keeps going on. You think they stopped doing all these sexual sins just because the Me Too movement started? No. What they're doing is they're just showing a form of godliness. Like, we care about these women, so we're going to promote their cause. But they keep still doing that evil stuff. Why? Because evilness is part of man. In his flesh dwells no good thing. And if you haven't trusted in Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection as atonement for your sin, you don't have the capacity to turn from your evil and have Christ live in you and do the good. Because you don't have Christ in you because you never believed the gospel. And so when they take things to court and have these suits, and then they say, we stand for these people that have been, maybe it's the blacks and the slavery. They talk about giving them reparations, or maybe it's the women with the Me Too movement, or whoever it is we're standing for. The problem is they're not turning to God for the solution. They're trying to fix it themselves. And then that way I appear godly. So, hey, there's nothing wrong here, I took care of the situation because we started this movement and we went against the oppression of the past and all that stuff. And that's what they do here. So they come against Benjamin, the tribe of Benjamin, for this evil that was done. Verse 11, all the men of Israel were gathered against the city, knit together as one man. So all these tribes against the city there where this happened with Benjamin. And verse 18, Judges 20 verse 18, the children of Israel arose and went up to the house of God and asked counsel of God and said, which of us shall go up first to the battle against the children of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. Children arose, men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin. And verse 21, the children of Benjamin came forth out of Gibeah and destroyed down to the ground of the Israelites that day 20 and 2,000. So then verse 23, the children of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until even, and asked counsel of the Lord, saying, shall I go up again to battle against the children of Benjamin my brother? And the Lord said, go up against him. Verse 24, the children of Israel came near against the children of Benjamin the second day. Verse 25, Benjamin went forth against them out of Gibeah the second day, and destroyed them down to the ground of the children of Israel again, 18,000 men. All these drew the sword. And you may think, well, is this a setup by God? I mean, this was a great evil that happened with this man and his concubine here in Judges 19. And they're trying to avenge what was going on. And here they go to the Lord and ask the Lord, should we go against them? And 2 days in a row, God says to go against the Benjamites. And 2 days in a row, the Benjamites destroy the other tribes. So then the third day then, they again inquire, verse 27, they inquire of the Lord. And verse 28, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, stood before it, the Ark of the Covenant in those days, saying, shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of Benjamin my brother, or shall I cease? And the Lord said, go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into thine hand. And so what happens then is the third day then Israel defeats Benjamin. But you think, well, why does God tell them to go up the first 2 days and yet they lose? And the way I see it is, you think of God looks at all of Israel as his people. You know, the 12 tribes of Israel, they are his people. We saw the prophecy in Genesis 49. We saw in Revelation 7. There's going to be 12,000 from each tribe that's sealed in the kingdom. So, you know, what do you do? Let's say if you had 12 sons and they're all fighting against each other, and 11 sons come to you and say, what should we do? Should we go against the other son Benjamin here and destroy him? I mean, as a parent, what do you do with that? I mean, you're not against any of your children. You love them all. And sure, they've done a lot of bad things and they're not turning to you and they're in their false religion, but you still love them. So it's not that God, you know, and other times when Israel goes against the Canaanites, God gives them the victory because God says, the Canaanites are to be utterly destroyed. They're wicked people. They're not my people. But all of Israel is called God's people. So for 11 tribes to go against one tribe, it'd just be like if you had 12 children and 11 are going against the one. You know, you're not really for the 11 or for the one. You're for all of them. You love them all. And so the Lord really isn't going to choose sides here. He just basically lets happen what will happen. And then finally, since they won't stop, then he gives the victory to Israel over Benjamin. But now, so now they've got another problem here. Verse 35, Judges 20 and verse 35, the Lord smote Benjamin before Israel, and the children of Israel destroyed of the Benjamites that day 20 and 5,000 and 100 men. All these drew the sword. So now you got the problem of, now we've got a tribe of Benjamin that's almost all lost. So it says, you go down to verse 48, they keep doing it. The men of Israel turned again upon the children of Benjamin and smote them with the edge of the sword, as well the men of every city as the beast, and all that came to hand. Also they set on fire all the cities that they came to. So here's what you got here. You've got, in Judges 19, you've got Judges 19, you've got gross human evil with this concubine and what they did to the concubine. So then they don't really go to God and say, what do we do about this? How do we get rid of the men of Belial or whatever? They come up with their own solution, and they say, we're going to destroy Benjamin because that happened in Benjamin, so we're against them. So then, Judges 20, man has his own solution, which is to destroy Benjamin, destroy his brother, destroy their brother, destroy one of the 12 tribes there. And so now they're looking at it after they've done it, and now they feel bad about it. And they say, well, what are we going to do? It says in verse 2, chapter 21 and verse 2, the people came to the house of God and abode there till even before God, and lift up their voices and wept sore, and said, O Lord God of Israel, why has this come to pass in Israel, that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel? Well, it's because you decided you would do it is the answer. You didn't go to God to ask God, what are we going to do about these certain men of Belial and what they did to this poor woman in Benjamin? You know, how do we get rid of the evil? Well, the answer would be turn to God. You know, obey His commandments and ask for forgiveness from Him and trust in God to save them. But they don't want to do that. Man does only what was right in his own eyes. So they don't want to go to God for that. They go to God for to be as justification for their evil and their wickedness. You know, just like the Catholic Church today. You do something bad, you don't say, I'm going to turn from it. What you do is you go for forgiveness from the priest. How many times do I have to pray the rosary to get forgiveness? Okay, I'm forgiven. Okay, great. And then I'll go and do the same thing again after I get out of here. And then I'll get forgiveness. That's what they're doing. They don't want to turn to God for the solution. They want to keep doing their human evil. But then they want to look like they're serving God, giving Him the lip service. So then they say, okay, God, should we destroy Benjamin? In other words, they don't ask, what should we do? How do we solve this problem? They've got their solution. And so then God basically says, well, then that's what you want to do, then I'll go along with it. And now they feel bad. Judges 21:3. Why is Benjamin destroyed? Or it's pretty close to being destroyed. They ask, well, it's because of your evil and your wickedness, and you didn't turn to God, and you didn't go to God for the solution. You just come up with your own plan. So then they say, okay, well, what we need to do then is we need to get wives for the remaining people of Benjamin. But the problem is, verse 5, Judges 21:5, the children of Israel said, who is there among all the tribes of Israel that came not up with the congregation unto the Lord? For they had made a great oath concerning him that came not up to the Lord to Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. So if you didn't go along with our plan to get God on our side, to sanctify or justify us killing our tribe of Benjamin, then we are going to kill you. You know, again, they just made up this stuff. So then they said, okay, well, there are these people in verse 9, we notice that the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead never went up to the Lord. So what we'll do then is we'll go and kill the people of Jabesh Gilead, and then it says in verse 12, they found among the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead 400 young virgins that had known no man by lying with any male. So what they do there is they verses 9 through 12, let's say 9 through 12, they say they kill Jabesh Gilead, the people of that city, and give the 400 virgins to Benjamin. So now they can have men with the 400 women, so now the tribe can get going again. But that really wasn't enough. They needed more than 400. So then what they do is they said in verse 19, then they said, behold, there is a feast of the Lord in Shiloh, yearly in a place which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goeth up from Bethel to Shechem, and on the south of Lebanon. Therefore they commanded the children of Benjamin, saying, Go and lie in wait in the vineyards, and see and behold, if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in dances. Then come ye out of the vineyards, catch you every man his wife of the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. Okay, so there's the new plan, verse 19 through 21. We didn't get enough virgins from Jabesh Gilead. We only got 400. So now, steal the daughters of Shiloh. Steal the daughters of Shiloh for wives for Benjamin. And so then that's what they do. And it says, verse 23, the children of Benjamin did so and took them wives according to their number of them that danced, whom they caught. And they went and returned unto their inheritance and repaired the cities and dwelt in them. And the children of Israel departed thence at that time, every man to his tribe and to his family. And they went out from thence, every man to his inheritance. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Doesn't this sound like a completely ridiculous plan? I mean, do you think this is what God would have them to do? First off, they decide to kill their own brother Benjamin. Then they feel bad about it and say, well, I don't understand why this tribe was almost destroyed. Well, it's because you didn't go to God. You came up with your own plan. And then, again, they don't ask God, well, what do we do now? They're almost destroyed. You know, God could fix it. You know, God could make sure Benjamin survives. No, they don't do that. They say, oh, we'll go kill these people in Jabesh Gilead, and then we'll give the virgins to Benjamin. And then they say, oh, that wasn't enough. Okay, well, when these girls come to dance at this festival, you just go grab a girl that you like, and that'll be your wife. You know, that's why it says there at the end, every man did that which was right in his own eyes. You notice, they don't ask God what we do. They don't say that they're sorry to God. They don't trust in God. They're not turning. The only time they turn to God is just to have that form of godliness. Like, okay, God, should we go against Benjamin today? Oh, okay. Well, God says we should do it. You know, it's like we come up with our own plan. We've got our own solution. And then we'll just make sure that God agrees with us and we'll go with it. So that shows you today, we're out of time, but that shows you just how bad it is in the days of Judges. And when you get to the end here, it looks like just like Sodom and Gomorrah. So how is God going to bring a Redeemer, Jesus, the Messiah? How is He going to save Israel in a condition like Sodom and Gomorrah? You notice in Sodom and Gomorrah, God destroyed that. He says, I can't redeem them. He destroys them. But yet God is going to save Israel. How does He do it? Well, the next book is the book of Ruth. And in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1, it says, Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled. The story of Ruth is in the time of the judges. So while there is this great evil, that they are like Sodom and Gomorrah, there is still some believers in Israel. Ruth is going to represent believing Israel. And then Boaz is going to represent the Lord Jesus Christ, her kinsman redeemer. And so Ruth provides the solution. Because if you just read Judges, you're thinking, God's plan is going to fail. Look at how evil these people are. This is not going to work. So the book of Ruth, 4 chapters, gives you the solution as to how God will have it work. So we're going to spend at least 1, maybe 2 weeks in the book of Ruth. So let's close with a word of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank You for the mercy You extended to us by not sending us to hell, but giving us the Lord Jesus Christ. We thank You that He died, was buried, and rose again as atonement for our sins. We thank You for the grace extended to us, that not only are we saved from hell, but we have eternal life in heaven. Only a loving God could do that to such evil, wicked people as ourselves. And so help us, Lord, to grow in grace, to read Paul's epistles, to operate in the sound doctrine there, and to learn from these mistakes in the Judges where man can't fix his own problems. He only makes things worse. So help us, Lord, to get away from our flesh and our tendency to solve things and instead focus on the doctrine You've given us in Paul's epistles and let Christ live in us. We thank You in Jesus' name. Amen.